Well, good evening again. Okay. We've got a lot to unpack. So we're gonna be on this lesson for a little while here. All of it discourse. As we study Bible prophecy, especially the events concerning the last days, the information can be a bit overwhelming if we allow it to be. But always remember what the Apostle John wrote. 1 John 4:4, ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Amen, that's right. In Matthew chapters 24-25, we find one of the most important passages on prophecy given in all the Bible. It's especially significant because Jesus himself spoke these words, and it's absolutely essential to our understanding of prophecy because this passage provides for us a master outline of the end times. This message from Jesus is known as the Olivet Discourse, and parallel accounts of the sermon appear in Mark 13 and Luke 21. And like Brother D and I were talking about, Luke 21 is actually directed more towards the Jews because it does speak of the temple, but it also applies to the end times as far as the Gentiles do, as both. What's particularly noteworthy in this message from Jesus begins with a test prophecy. In Matthew 24:1, the disciples show off the beautiful grandeur of the temple to Jesus, but what was Jesus' response? Matthew 24:2, and Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall be not one left here, one stone upon another, that shall not be thrown down. And I think why they call this a test prophecy, because this prophecy was going to occur during the lives of the apostles. They were going to see it come to pass. So, that's just more evidence that they would have that prophecy is true, because once this happened, then they knew everything else that Jesus had spoken in this chapter was also going to come true. History records for us that Jesus' prediction in verse 2 was fulfilled in AD 70 when Roman armies led by Titus took the city of Jerusalem and utterly destroyed the temple. If Jesus' prediction about the temple came true, then we can be sure everything else he said about the future in Matthew 24:25 will come true as well. Jesus was prompted by the questions asked by the disciples. The questions appear in Matthew 24:3, and what are they? And here they are. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? Notice that when Jesus heard the questions, he did not rebuke the disciples for wanting to know about the future. In fact, he encouraged them through his detailed answer. This tells us that in God's eyes, the understanding of prophecy is definitely a worthwhile pursuit. And of course, Matthew 24:15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. At the same time that Jesus answered his disciples, he gave an important warning. And Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive many. I'm going to go back up to this one just a minute. Now, like I told you last week, prophecy is pattern. And what they were thinking at the time, of course, the way they always think, like I said before, Ecclesiastes 1:9, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. So that's the way they think. When they hear these prophecies, it's in a pattern, what has happened before, unlike we do. Like I said, we get our philosophy from the Greeks and the Romans, and they think a one and done, and that's where you get preterism. Those are people that believe that those prophecies were fulfilled back then, and that was it, and it's one and done. They think, that's it, but it's pattern, always to the Jews, The future is in the past. It's a repeating pattern. And that's what you look for when you study Scripture. You look for a pattern in there. Jesus set one when he ascended to heaven after his resurrection. And the two men told his apostles, he's going to come back in like manner. That's going to be his pattern. That's the way he's going to come back. That way, that's the second coming. Now, when he speaks about the abomination of desolation, we, like they do, think about Antiochus Epiphanes IV, what he did in the temple. And as we go on, some of the other things, Jesus talks about the terrible things that are going to happen in the tribulation. They saw that too, at the same time when the Greeks were in charge. In fact, I did bring my Maccabees just to show a little example of what the Jews were going through at that time. And this is about Antiochus. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people and everyone should leave his laws, so that all heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to this religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent by messengers into Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end that they might forget the law and change all ordinances. One reason he did this, he wanted to unify the empire, because he not only had Syria, he had these other nations, Israel and around Israel, and he wanted to unify them all because he was wanting to take over Egypt, take over Ptolemy's land also, and make he was trying to do what Alexander did. And that's one reason he did that. He was trying to wipe out the religion. And it says, and whosoever should not do according to the commandment of the kings, he said he should die. In the selfsame manner wrote he to the whole kingdom and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. And this is just some of the cruelty that he committed. It said, at which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised. And they hanged the infants about their necks, and rifled their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved, and confirmed themselves not to eat any unclean thing. Wherefore, the rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, and they might not profane the holy covenant, so they died. And there was very great wrath upon Israel. But on the other hand, there were Jews that went along with this. In fact, it says about them, it says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device well pleased them. So you're going to see it in Matthew some more, where he talks about betraying one another, and you'll be killed for his name's sake. We identify that as Jesus. It was God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he was trying to eradicate out of Israel. So he did these things, and there were a whole lot that still stuck to their beliefs, stuck to the festivals and the sacrifice, and they would not eat swine's flesh. He even tried to persuade I guess the soldiers liked this one high priest, and they said, well, just take some of your sacred meat in there, pretend like it's pork, and he wouldn't do it. So they ended up killing him. And they went city by city all the way through Israel to make them sacrifice a swine upon the altars, until one guy, and his name Mattathias, he was in the city of Modin, a small city. I think it's like 40 miles from Jerusalem. And then the king's officers came to me, said, and answers the king's officer and said to Mattathias on the wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and great man in the city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. Now therefore come thou first, and fulfill the king's commandment like all the heathen have done, yea, and the men of Judah also, and as such as remain at Jerusalem. So thou shalt in thy house be in number of the king's friends, and thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and gold, and many rewards. Then Mattathias answered and spake with a loud voice, through all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey, though all the nations under the king's dominion obey him, and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers, and gives consent to his commandment. Yet I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or the left. Now when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. Which thing then Mattathias saw. He was inflamed with zeal, and his reins trembled, neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. Also the king's commissioner, who compelled to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down. Thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like as Phinehas did unto Zambri the son of Salam. And Mattathias cried throughout the cities with a loud voice, saying, whoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that ever they had in the city. Now, I don't want to get too far into that, but that's one of the reasons why some of the apocryphal books, especially Maccabees is a history. When that happened, it wasn't that far from the apostles, because this happened in 161 BC. So that's less time than we have between now and the American Revolution. So that was in their minds. They knew when Jesus was speaking, what he was talking about the violence that was going on and the abomination of desolation, when Antiochus did all that stuff. Now, Antiochus, he didn't want to wipe out the Jews. He wanted them to assimilate. That's why he did all that. So that gives you kind of a background, what's going through their mind as Jesus was talking to the apostles, what the apostles were thinking. You know, this is where the pattern comes in. And Jesus is basically saying this type of thing is going to happen to Israel again. I didn't stray too far, did I? Anybody have any questions so far? At the same time that Jesus answered his disciples, he gave an important warning. Matthew 24:4, and Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many, and many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. Now, as I talked about a little bit last week, the Jews today, most of the Orthodox ones, are expecting two Messiahs. Messiah ben Joseph is the one that's going to build the temple, recapture the land, drive the enemies out. Then Messiah ben David is going to come and sit on the seat, or sit on David's throne, and he's going to be the one that rules. Now the first one, Messiah ben Joseph, doesn't have to be a Jew. All he's doing is preparing the way for Messiah ben David to come. And that's one of the hopes that they had. They were calling Donald Trump the Messiah, which they don't mean divinely. They mean, he was anointed. That's what Messiah means. He was anointed, just like King Saul was anointed. King David was anointed. They had a special appointment with God. They were to do a special thing for God. The Jews today believed that Donald Trump was going to fulfill that. They were looking for him to rebuild the temple or help them get the temple rebuilt. In fact, they even asked Trump and Putin at the same time, would you help us? And Putin said, yes, I think that's a good idea, surprisingly enough. So that could be one of the false Christs. Of course, it's going to be the Antichrist that's going to come and say that. And I don't think it's Donald Trump, but he may help them build the temple, I believe, if he gets elected again. And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. You may think we don't have false prophets nowadays, but in some faiths, they still believe in prophets. And I don't mean someone that prophesies, I'm going to get in a car wreck tomorrow, or something's going to happen. Those are something that may happen soon. We may have a dream about something that's going to happen and it comes true. These false prophets are talking biblical prophecy. They're saying, this is going to happen worldwide or to this nation. There aren't any. Those prophets are in the past. What will believers hear about, according to verse 6a? Wars and rumors of wars. Again, back in the time of Antiochus, they were hearing that also, because this wasn't a one and done with Antiochus when they kicked him out. The Jews had allegiances, had treaties with several countries around them. They had them with the Assyrians. They had a treaty with the Romans. They had treaties with Egypt. And Antiochus and Egypt were always going at each other. In fact, Rome stepped in one time. And that's when Antiochus got really mad. That's when he desecrated the temple, stole a lot of he raided the temple treasury, and then he made people sacrifice on the altars. It was because Antiochus had appointed a high priest, and you can't do that. You don't mess with the lineage of the high priest. They have to be appointed according to the Jewish tradition. But he did it because this guy supported him. I think his name was Jason. And then Antiochus went down to Egypt to engage in war. Well, the Jews back in Jerusalem thought, well, this guy's going to get killed. And what they did, they overcame Jason, and they put in the rightful high priest. Well, Antiochus didn't get killed. He came back, and he was mad. And he went through Jerusalem, and that's when he started getting really violent with the people, because he found out they had conspired behind his back and changed out the high priest without consulting him, and that's when he really got upset. That's when the Jews finally said enough of this, and the Maccabees started a rebellion against them. But the Maccabees were making alliances too. So this went on for about 15 years before the Romans finally came in. Because they did have an alliance with Rome, and the Romans decided, well, we'll protect you as long as you pay us tribute. We're your friends and all that. So that's the background to that. So they were constantly in war for even that short 15 years. So this is another thing that the apostles are picking up on. How should believers react to this news? Matthew 24, let us see that ye be not troubled. According to verse 7, what are 4 specific things that will happen? Matthew 24:7, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. Nation against nation. The Greek word that's used there is ethnos. Basically what it's talking about is race wars. Races being incited against each other. And we definitely see that today. And then, of course, kingdom against kingdom, as nation, that would be country against country today. Famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. Earthquakes happening in places where you wouldn't expect them. They're finding these deep, deep faults that are happening. And they say, well, you know, earthquakes have increased. They really haven't, because just because they can detect small quakes, their detection is much better. The larger quakes are happening in increasing frequency, and they're able to look back and see that, like the magnitude 6 and above. They're happening more and more than that should happen over a certain period of time. And of course, pestilences, COVID, HIV, Zika virus. Fortunately, they're happening one after another right now, but just think if 3 or 4 of them hit at the same time, and that's what it's talking, they're going to become really intense. Famines, there's always a famine going on someplace. What does verse 8 tell us about these 4 things? Matthew 24:8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Verses 9 through 14 describe the first half of the tribulation period. What will happen during these 3.5 years? 3 of those will be in the minds of the apostles that happened back in the time of the Maccabees: affliction, murder, and hatred for those who confess Jesus, or you could say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in the case when they were fighting the Greeks. Offense, betrayal, and hatred within the body of believers, and they saw that within their own ranks during Antiochus' time. False prophets will deceive many. Love will wax cold, again, within the body of believers. And of course, the ones in Antiochus' time that went along with him and did the sacrifices, their love waxed cold for the Lord. The gospel will be preached in all the world. The event described in verse 15 will take place at the halfway point of the tribulation. What will people see? At 24:15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. And Daniel 9:27, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay, what does Jesus want everyone to do in response to the event described in verse 15? Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down or take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For pray ye that your flight not be in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. There's a whole lot in that. Flee into the mountains. That's what Titusville, the Maccabees, that's what they did. When he slew the king's commissioner, and he told all the people, you know, if you're going to stand with me, come with me. And they did flee to the mountains. Antiochus did catch wind of that, and he went after them. And he caught, I think there was around, they said 1,000. They took all their household goods, their cattle, and everything, and fled, and they were in a cave. And the king's commissioner said, well, if you come out and do the sacrifice, we won't count this against you. But they said no. They said no. And their reasoning was that we're not going to fight. It's the Sabbath. We're not going to fight back. If they kill us, then we'll be justified before the Lord, and the world will know that we were innocent in this thing. So they were all slaughtered. They didn't fight back at all, and weren't slaughtered. And this is actually set a precedent for the Maccabees, because the Maccabees found out about it and said, we're not going to do that. Otherwise, we're going to be wiped out as a nation. So if they attack us on the Sabbath, we're going to fight. And they do that to this day. But also, in that verse 20, pray your flight not be in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. This tells me that the law of Moses is going to be full effect in Israel before the tribulation. So people will be so strict as to obey it. A lot of them won't flee because it is a Sabbath day. But the Maccabees had set the precedent. No, if your life is in danger, you do that. But the gist of it is you do it right now. And that's what Judas Maccabee was telling the people also. He said, now is the time to flee. Yes, sir.
I've heard it preached more than once about the in 70 that no Christians died. That they actually did this. They fled from the mountains and that they escaped.
Yes, I've read the same.
And the ones that were slaughtered were, I guess, Orthodox Jews.
Yep. They were the unbelievers. I think I had something else on that. No, I'll come back to it. How does Jesus describe this time in verse 21? For then shall be great tribulation, such as not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Jesus gives another warning in verses 23 through 26. What does he caution against? Then if any man shall say to you, lo, here's Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. Jesus warns against the arrival of false Christs and prophets. Of course, Christ means anointed one, or Messiah. There will be those who claim to be the Messiah, the long-awaited deliverer of the Jews. And I want to emphasize again that the first Messiah they're expecting does not have to be a Jew. False prophet, one who pretends to know the future or falsely proclaims the words of God. We have that. Of course, we have that today. People, palm readers, occultists. According to verses 27 and 29 through 31, what can we expect to happen at the time of Christ's return? 24, 27, for as lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even into the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. His return will be sudden and without warning. Of course, he emphasizes that. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. That first verse, meaning after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. If you notice in the Bible, usually after a judgment, there's darkness. And that reminds me of Genesis, when the Holy Spirit hovered above our heart hovered in darkness above the abyss, and there was darkness. And of course, I don't want to get into the controversy over that, over pre-existing civilization and the earth being destroyed. But when you have darkness like that, it's typical of God's judgment. the sun and the moon become dark, and the stars fall from heaven. What is the sign of the Son of Man in heaven? And you definitely could say it's the signs that he's speaking about, that we're going to see coming to pass, especially that first verse, the darkness. There's just going to be darkness, and the stars will fall. And who are the elect? I would think it would be all the believers at that time. What important announcement did Jesus make about his second coming in verse 36? But for that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. Jesus introduces a doctrine of imminency, meaning Jesus' rapture of the church can come at any moment. There are no prophetical events that have to take place prior to the rapture. And over and over again, you see that warning. Watch, be ready at all the time, because we don't know. We know the seasons. We can read the signs that he's talking about and know it's getting close as more and more prophecy gets fulfilled. Some of it that looks like you're not sure whether it can mean one thing or another or both. It's going to become clearer and clearer as we get closer to the end times, to when the tribulation is going to happen.
John, here in verse 36, what's your opinion about this is speaking of the rapture? This through the rest of the chapter.
But of that day?
This leads into where it says there'll be two in the field.
Oh, that one, okay. Okay.
This is where supposedly we start looking at the rapture because of that day and hour.
Yes.
Also, just as a side point, I underline that neither the Son, which it's interesting that at that time anyway, Jesus did know something that God the Father knew. Of course, that causes a little bit of concern.
And yeah, that did me for a long time too. But I had to remember at the time that he said this, he was human. He was fully human. Whether he knows now, I don't know. But according to Jewish wedding tradition, he doesn't. So, but we definitely don't, and we can't know it. But like I said, we can know the season, and we know it's getting really close. I wouldn't want to take a chance. And the verse we come to about the wicked servant, you'll see that even more. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh. And this is the part. What will happen to those who did not heed Jesus' exhortation in verse 44? But if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I think that means something that you may not agree with, but I found a pretty good exposition on it. And this is about that particular parable, and this is one of Chuck Missler's books. Okay. First of all, he's addressing his own disciples. Jesus was addressing not only his disciples, also the future church. Watch therefore, for you know not when your Lord will return. The usage of your Lord validates that he was talking to believers. Christ is not talking about unbelievers here. Why would an unbeliever even care about being faithful or waiting for the Lord's return? The faithful and wise servant in this story, of course, is equivalent to a true disciple or a spiritual Christian. This faithful servant places the desires of the Lord of the house above his own and was an obedient steward who provided for his family. He did what he was required to do, and he steadfastly waited for his Lord's return. In the same way, God entrusts us to do his will, to feed his spiritual family and await his return. Our reward for doing so will be the privilege of greater service in the kingdom. The special pleasures, honors, and splendors which are to accompany the return of the Lord from heaven and setting up of his kingdom are to be a reward for fidelity and faithful service in his absence. Without this, future blessings will be forfeit. The unfaithful and disobedient servant, however, is the equivalent of a carnal and nominal Christian. Note that the word evil in Matthew 24:48 is the Greek word kakos, means a worthless or injurious person or someone that has been disqualified. It means he lacks the qualities that he should possess. Simply put, he is not worthy. The servant thought his Lord would delay his coming, and this, of course, affected how he lived his life. He was lazy, untrustworthy, and cruel. He abused his position by being ill-tempered and self-indulgent to those who worked with him. He thought he would never be called into account for these things because he secretly believed his Lord would not come. Jesus then replaces the term cast out here with the term cut asunder, which metaphorically means to be cut open so all can see. It means to expose and scrutinize the thoughts and motives of a person's heart. It is simply an analogy for what will happen at the judgment seat. Hebrews 4:12 talks about a sharp two-edged sword that will bring light not only to the motives of our heart, but also to the things of darkness. Jesus also replaces the term outer darkness here with the term a portion with the hypocrites. Hypocrite refers to believers who have lived a double life, the foolish ones. The word hypocrite can be used of non-believers, but it can also be used of Christians who judge others while ignoring their own sin. In this scripture, hypocrisy simply means unfaithful. It is referring to one who assumes the role of a servant but doesn't live like one. It is someone who says one thing but lives something totally different. The Pharisees were a perfect example of hypocrites. They pretended that they were spiritual and holy, and yet in action they were insincere, pretentious, self-righteous, and they stumbled many times. Jesus called them on it many times. Woe to you, you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but are within full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Like the disobedient servant in the parable of the 10 talents, this unfaithful and unfruitful servant will be thrown into a specific place, a place with all other hypocrites who say they were Christians but really didn't live it, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We believe this refers to a dark place outside the light and company of spiritual saints and the blessings provided for them. A Christian who refuses to avail himself of the moment-by-moment cleansing that God provides is seen walking in darkness. He has not been cleansed by the washing of the water of the Word. Therefore, he can only remain in the darkened courtyard outside the light of the holy place. And I don't know about you, but it makes it a lot clearer to me what Jesus is talking about, that he is talking to believers, and they're going to suffer a great loss. That's why there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, because I always wondered why there's weeping in heaven. It's not it's because of regret. The things that we should have done, the faith that we should have shown, being obedient to him like we should have, that we didn't do. Then he gives some consequences It says consequences for an unfaithful and carnal lifestyle. In review, then, unfaithful Christians are those believers who are disobedient, self-consumed, and self-indulgent. They have hardened their hearts, they walk by the flesh, and they are dull of hearing. According to the scriptures, here are some of the consequences that they may encounter. They may receive a stinging rebuke from the Lord because they denied him in their actions and failed to persevere to the end. They may be called wicked servants. They may be cast out of fellowship. They may be cut in pieces, that is, their secret motivations exposed. They may receive millennial disinheritance, loss of rewards, and be disqualified for the prize. They may be excluded from the joy of the wedding celebration, the marriage feast, and from ruling and reigning with Christ. They may even experience gnashing of teeth, despair, regret, and remorse. God does not punish believers, but in his love he does discipline and chastise them, and he may do so in the coming kingdom also. And that's one thing I'd always wondered about, that I thought he was casting them into hell, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about their loss. And I just know so many people that have been saved, and that's all they do. They don't come to church. They won't participate in any ministry. If they do, they're just being disobedient. And the Lord has to do something about that. He's perfectly just in all his judgments, so he has to do something. You can't give him rewards for not being obedient and faithful.
So you're saying this takes place in the Niess?
Yes. Yeah, that's an important thing to add there. Yeah, that's definitely this is not the great white throne or the sheep and goats. This is right after the rapture.
It has to be subsequent to the rapture. So it's within the fit.
Yep. Okay, and this is on our chart. Will all the things Jesus describes in Matthew 24:25 really take place? In Matthew 24:35, near the midpoint of his message, Jesus said, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away." In other words, everything Jesus taught will happen exactly the way he said it will. There is nothing that can change the course of the future. That is another affirmation that we can fully trust Bible prophecy. Keywords. Parousia, Greek word parousia, is a noun that means a coming or a presence. It is used in the New Testament. It can refer to any individual's coming or presence to a specific place or to be with a specific people. Apanthesis, a Greek word for meeting, specifically referred to an official welcome of a newly arrived dignitary. In ancient days, the people of the territory, hearing that a new king or official was arriving, will go out to meet the new official. Sometimes these people would travel half a day or a full day or even 2 days to meet him prior to his arrival in the city. In eschatology, the same idea is presented as the church is raptured to meet Jesus in the air. And this is a view I hadn't thought about before, but it makes perfect sense because that was the custom of the time. When you had an important personage come into your town or city, that you would go out and meet them. I didn't know they would travel that far or take that much time to travel, but it does make sense. An example would be Jacob and Esau. When Jacob was going to meet Esau, he was expressing respect for him. That's why he sent all the gifts, all these cattle and sheep and camels ahead of him to Esau, and went to meet him halfway. So I know it was for him to save his neck too, but it was still something that was done at the time. So okay, now that's not going to be all that we're going to come back to this a little bit more. Paul's going to be talking about it also in the next lesson, but I want to do a little more on the time of the Maccabees and what the apostles were thinking was when Jesus was presenting all this. And I want to bring it in line with the feast of Israel, because there's one important feast we really don't recognize, but even Jesus honored it. It was the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah. And that was part of when the Maccabees threw off the Greek rule. It's a feast, and we know it was celebrated by Jesus. In John 10, it says he was in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication. Now, feast, the word feast, is actually interchangeable with the word seasons, and it means divine appointment. The word is moed, means divine appointment. This is an appointment with God that he makes with us. So the feasts are important to know. And as you've heard before, the spring feasts kind of represent Jesus' first coming, and then the fall feasts will be his second coming. But Hanukkah and Purim also, very unique, and they tie in with what Jesus was saying. So we'll get into that a little bit next time, because it's just something that you kind of need to know the background. It helps a whole lot with prophecy. In fact, one of the things is, this is just a side note on it, when the Greeks defiled the temple, when Antiochus defiled the temple, and when the Maccabees finally kicked him out and came back, the gates were burned, there were weeds growing in all the courtyards, and of course they had to rededicate this part of Hanukkah, but they didn't have any specific right to cleanse the altar. So what they did, they took the altar apart and they piled it, said it piled it in a convenient place outside of the temple district. And they said, well, what are we going to do? And they said, well, we'll just leave them here until a prophet comes. Well, they're put outside the beautiful gate, I think it was where I read, and that's where Jesus rode into town. And when the Pharisees told me, keep your apostles quiet, keep the people from shouting it, he said, well, if I did, these very stones would shout. It could have been those stones from the altar, because that is written in the book of Maccabees. We'll leave them here until a prophet comes and tells us what to do with them. So, interesting side.
In there, because one of the things that you need to be aware of when you're studying any portion of the Bible, but especially Bible prophecy, is when you go to read a commentator, you need to know what his position is, what his view is. I just found out recently, I was so shocked to find out R.C. Sproul is a preterist. He believes all this stuff has already happened. I was shocked by that. But you need to know those things about whom you're reading, because that's going to be from the perspective that they take. This particular, why I put this up is there's some that believe, that will tell you that the rapture and the second coming are two separate events. That's fine. But then there's also a group that will tell you that the second coming is a single event in two phases. And these are the two phases that they will give you. I just pointed out because, at least to me, I found it very confusing. I'd be reading one guy and he's treating it with different, as two different events. And then it gets confusing as to what the signs are that we're reading about in Matthew 24. What I would tell you, where I have landed, at least for today, is that the rapture is a signless event. There are no signs leading to the rapture. What we're reading here and what we're seeing in Matthew 24, those are signs of Jesus' second coming. The rapture actually is a sign of Jesus' second coming. There's nothing that has to happen before the rapture. The rapture can happen right now. Nothing has to take place. So when the rapture does happen, it will be yet a very obvious sign, I would say, that the second coming is now close. Now there's some gray area there as far as I've read some guys that say that the rapture immediately triggers the tribulation. I don't necessarily think that's true, because I think there's got to be some things to happen in between there. But whether it's a minute or 100 years, I don't know. But these things that we're reading about are not signs of the rapture. Now, obviously, keep in mind, though, this is the caveat, I guess. As we're seeing the signs of his second coming approaching, it obviously tells us that the rapture is getting closer. You see what I'm saying? The signs don't lead you to the rapture. The signs lead you to the second coming, and the rapture is one of those signs. And so that's there's a really good explanation of that, and I'll try to remember to bring that book with me next week. I was just reading that today, how they described it, and so yeah, I just want you to be aware that there's different views out there on like I said, the preterist, the dispensationalism, whatever the case may be. Amillennialists and what have you, they're going to be, these things are analogies or metaphors or whatever, symbolism and what have you. So you got to know the perspective of the person you're reading. And not saying that their stuff isn't worth reading, I wouldn't say that to you, but you need to understand that, because I know one of the things that I struggled with for a long, long time was this chapter right here used to confuse me. I've spent days on this chapter with great frustration because I'd go to all these different guys and be reading them, and they would all have something different to say. And by the way, just because they're a commentator and they have a book doesn't mean they know it all. You will find things that I have gone countless times. Well, I need to know what this is. I have gone to 4, 5, 6, 7 commentators, and they skip over it. They don't say a word. So there's things in there that obviously they don't understand either. So, it's just one of those things you have to pray about, read about. But again, personally, when I look at the future events, I don't get dogmatic about it. Yes, I want to have some kind of concept of what I see coming, but I'm not going to get wrapped around the axle on it. Okay, any comments?